Since the 1800s and before, women have been treated unequally. Many women were not able to attend school and instead were forced to stay at home and learn to cook and learn to clean. One of the major helpers in our society at the time was Abigail Adams, who had helped women become more equal with their husbands. She wrote a very famous letter to her husband John in March of 1776. Remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors, was written as a way to get her husband to convince men that they should not have as many unlimited powers as they did at the time. After all, women had no right to vote, no right to property, and no custody of children in case of divorce. Why don't we take a blast to the past and take a look at some pivotal points in women's rights history? Women's suffrage first began in the 1820s and 1830s, which was years before the Civil War. During that time, many organizations became prominent, with women having a big role in all the organizations that stepped up to the plate. In 1848, many women and even some men met up in Seneca Falls to discuss the means of women's rights. Most of whom attended agreed that women deserved to determine the political state of the nation along with men. But it had taken many years before Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Stanton could come to an agreement about holding a convention. But the 14th and 15th Amendments raised questions that many women had. The 15th Amendment guaranteed that all African American males had a right to vote. The 14th Amendment extended the constitutional protection to all citizens, defining citizens as males. This led Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan Brownell Anthony, as well as others, to believe that this was their best opportunity to get lawmakers to give women universal voting rights.
This also led Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Susan B. Anthony to create a group for both women and African Americans together. Because of this, they refused to accept these rights because they felt that they could neutralize the vote. In 1869, this terminal called the National Women's Suffrage Association to form. However, there was a group toward the 15th Amendment called the American Women's Suffrage Association. Eventually, this all faded, causing the two groups to merge into the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA. Saying they were created equal to men, they said that they were different from men, thus deserving rights that the men had. The argument served many political agendas, such as temperance advocates. In 1910, a few western states, Idaho and Utah, had given the rights at the end of the 19th century. Finally, it gave women the right to vote. However, more established states from the South and the East held back from giving women these privileges. In 1916, the president of NAWSA, Carrie Chapman Catt, created a plan to finally win all the remaining states over.
She came up with the idea to use a strong plan of attack known as blitz campaigning. However, some groups, like the National Women's Party, focused more on militant tactics. World War I did slow down campaigning for women, but they advanced. Their efforts finally paid off when the 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920, by the final state, Tennessee.
The last major hurdle was thought to have been the suffrage movement, but then the fight for equality began to strengthen in the 1960s. This was spurred by the civil rights movement, bringing forth the wanting for more rights. In 1961, 50,000 women protested across the United States as the group Women Strike for Peace for nuclear disarmament. The Commission on the Status of Women was founded by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1961 after being appointed by the president at the time, John Kennedy. However, it took a meeting with Eleanor Roosevelt to convince him that early women really did need more rights.
The commission discovered many new laws restricting women from being certain occupations, performing jury duty, and getting paid equally for the same amount of work they did as men. This caused many different types of women groups to be formed at the time. However, there were a few bigger groups, such as women's rights groups, which fought for rights of equality. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was written primarily to keep the rights safe for minorities. Eventually, the Commission of Women had disbanded due to lack of funds, so a new group came to the scene in 1966. The group, the National Organization for Women, also fought against women being discriminated. The Women's Equality League formed 2 years later to investigate the situations in which workforce paid men more than women. The New York Radical Women also caused a stir this year by trashing the Miss America pageant in Atlantic City by creating the Freedom Trash Can, in which protesters threw false eyelashes and hair curlers, among other things, into tin garbage cans. However, these movements would not have been possible without certain people to help pave the way. Two wonderful examples of this are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. This dynamic duo was introduced to each other by Amelia Jenks Bloomer in 1851. Elizabeth was described as the thinker and writer of the two, while Susan was described as the Napoleon, not only because of her tactical skill, but because of her representation on behalf of women's societies between 1869 and 1906 in front of Congress. Even after the death of Elizabeth, Susan continued to fight for rights right up until her death. Another great example would be Sojourner Truth, who fought for both African Americans as well as women. But these weren't all. Another extremely influential woman in a later movement was Eleanor Roosevelt, former First Lady. Her work with the Commission helped investigate laws taking away important rights from women. And although there were people to knock them down along the way, these advocates always stood tall, along with many others, their head up high, and a cause that they were fighting for in their heart.